This is about defending democracy. This is no longer Democrats versus Republicans. What do you want your kids to believe in? There must be give and take.
This is White Flag with Joe Walsh.
Hey, Joe Walsh, former Congressman Joe Walsh, back with you. White Flag with Joe Walsh. Every week I sit down with somebody who doesn't think like me because I find that to be a hell of a lot more interesting. Listen to this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, White Flag with Joe Walsh. Sitting down today with Max Burns, a long time, for a young guy, a long time Democratic strategist, founder of Third Degree Strategies. He writes for MSNBC. He writes for CNN. He's got a really cool Substack out there that you all ought to be aware of, maxburns.substack.com. I'm going to get into this with him. He's on Twitter. He's not tweeting that much anymore. You can find him at the Max Burns. Max, right out of the gate, you are still a Democrat, correct?
I am. I'm hanging in there, and thanks so much for having me. But yeah, you're right. It gets exhausting. I've been doing this semi-professionally since I was 14 and professionally since I was 20. And you take the hits and you keep going. But it is certainly a time where I'm seeing a lot of people in my age group and even younger starting to get burned out. So yeah, it's a mixed bag out there.
I wanted to cover a couple topics with you. And I want to get into your party, the Democratic Party. I've got a couple thoughts on that party, and I'd love your take. But I want to start with Elon Musk and Twitter. You had, in your Substack, maxburns.substack.com, you had a really interesting article on Elon and Twitter. I think I've got it right. The incredible vanishing Twitter. You've written a few pieces in the last number of months on Elon and Twitter. Obviously, you're much more kind of attuned and knowledgeable to what you think's going on with Twitter than I would. I want to start way, way, way up high, 36,000 feet, and ask the biggest, broadest question. What is he doing? Like, what do you think Elon Musk is doing? What's he up to?
I think that's honestly a question a lot of people at Twitter, those who are left, are asking themselves too, because it does seem over the past few months, and I've been covering Elon basically monthly since December of last year, and what we see is a sort of pattern that is a lack of a pattern, that it's Elon Musk making this up as he goes, attempting to keep his user base intact, attempting to monetize this somehow, because Twitter is burning money at a rapid rate. And we've seen as the months go on, more and more sort of schemes that Elon Musk has come up with to try and bring money in that are just driving users away. And now we see this new CEO, Linda Yaccarino, who doesn't seem to really have a portfolio. Elon is still making decisions without consulting her. And I'm not even sure she could tell you what the 6-month plan for Twitter is. And for a tech company, I mean, that's a dangerous place to be.
So, my uneducated theory, Max, is, and I kind of felt this way from the beginning, I don't think he knows what he's doing. I attribute a lot of this to just basic incompetence. I hear a lot, though, from people, Max, who tell me this is all the plan. He's wanted to fucking take Twitter down. He's doing this on purpose. Where do you come down on that kind of thing?
Well, I sort of wish he had that kind of foresight. What it is for me that I see is, one is, as an executive at other companies that were more successful and more popular, Elon Musk got a very skewed view of his own abilities, people telling him that he's a genius, that he can do anything. And he also got a real taste for attention. One of the things that Jack Dorsey at Twitter really managed to avoid was becoming the center of the conversation. He recognized, as Mark Zuckerberg does, that you can't both run a social media platform and be its person of the day every day, because those are divergent interests, and you're going to want, as Musk has, to drive traffic to you, to find ways to amplify your own voice, even if that hurts the company. And from what I see, this is really something that serves as an ego trip for Elon Musk. I don't think he thought that it would be so tricky to balance the finances. And we forget he doesn't have any experience in social networks. It is its own distinct type of business. The ones that succeed have executives who've been there for decades at this point. And he thought he could come in and do it all on the cheap, and that did not turn out to be the case.
Back up. Is he a genius?
Listen, I think Elon Musk is clearly a smart guy, if only in how to build companies and allocate resources like at SpaceX. But just like with Ben Carson, just like with anyone else, it shows you skills are not necessarily transferable.
Yeah.
You can be a great surgeon and a terrible politician. You can be great at understanding what you need to build a rocket company and have no idea what users actually want to keep coming back to a social media platform for. And the one thing we've seen is that he just doesn't like the criticism, and he's not handling an environment well where people can speak back to him.
He seems like so I can't think of a better word, so immature to me. I mean, Threads launches and he calls Zuckerberg a cuck, and then let's see who's got a bigger dick. And does he realize when he puts shit out like that it's a problem?
Well, it certainly doesn't seem to affect him. I mean, the fact is his investors in Twitter have written down their investments significantly. Okay. Fidelity took a 50% loss. The company's worth maybe a third what it was when he paid for it. But this is in many ways his vanity trip. And like you said, I don't know what's worse, the fact that he behaves like a 10-year-old or that he uses memes that are way out of date. Just trying to seem cool, circulating around these groups that will validate him, that are right now very right-wing, very reactionary, extreme people. But it's similar, I think, in a lot of ways to Kanye West, as he was looking for validation. He is an insecure guy, without a doubt. And it makes him feel better to post and to take swings at people. But when you're Twitter's owner and also its biggest bully, that really starts to create a cancer in the system.
But is it too simple, and or you disagree with the notion that there's sabotage here, like Elon is purposely trying to destroy this platform?
Yeah, I've definitely heard it. I don't necessarily agree with it. I think what it is this problem you see with a lot of very successful entrepreneurs who just think they've figured it out, that because they're rich, they are brilliant and that they have these skills. When, in reality, Musk got very lucky with PayPal. It set him up on a long course to start companies like Tesla, which people forget is still not generating a lot of money. A lot of the hype is coming off of that. We're starting to see investigations into Musk's misconduct there too. So clearly, I think once people start looking and really investigating him, they're going to see that he's not the genius that he played himself up to be.
Is there, Max?
He may not be actively trying, but it's working.
I noticed that a lot of my former followers and supporters on the right have kind of a cultish attitude toward him. What do you have any sense as to what his politics are? Is he right wing? Is he?
Well, it's very tough to say. I mean, he said that he was supporting Republicans in 2022, encouraged people on Twitter to vote for Republicans. But Elon Musk, again, is a product of his insecurity, I really think, is wherever he finds acceptance. And the people willing to embrace him right now are, ironically, a lot of the same Republicans who a few years ago wanted to dismantle social media, who accurately saw social media as a real problem with disinformation and in a democracy, who now want to give Elon Musk total carte blanche to do whatever he wants. And any attempts to regulate that misinformation are viewed as autocratic. I mean, it's a stunning 180.
Max, what are some of the biggest mistakes he's made since he purchased this thing, in your mind?
Well, purchasing it at all at the price he did was the biggest mistake, right? But he's really felt like that he would just get the benefit of the doubt on this, that he could build this company however he wanted. In the same way, I think that Donald Trump thought, looking at Barack Obama, oh, when you become president, everybody treats you nice. You get the easy road. And then being shocked that wasn't the case. Elon has found that he can't just ignore regulators. The European Union is at the risk of telling Twitter it can't operate there because it refuses to engage in basic trust and safety. It refuses to police anti-Semitic content, which is a crime in Germany. And he's here even at the FTC. It found that he's not paying rent, that he's potentially violating worker agreements in California. And all those things are catching up to him. But he really is finding that there is law and cause and effect here, even if he maybe didn't think that's when he started out.
Does he have a history, Max? Do you know of? Does he strikes me as the kind of guy who doesn't necessarily surround himself with really good, smart people.
No, he mainly seems to surround himself with people that he has affairs with and then buys horses. I mean, he's not got a great ability to take no. He's very thin-skinned. He's fired numerous Twitter employees who've tried to warn him about the exact technical problems Twitter's now facing. The reality is he wants people around him who are going to validate the image he has of himself. And a lot of that comes from his personal life. I mean, Elon Musk has said in interviews that he's very lonely, that he feels still very raw about his divorce, that he feels very isolated from people. So it's no surprise to me that he bought a large social network and made everybody look at him.
Max, that's just fascinating. You keep coming back to this, and it's fascinating, and it makes sense. The word insecure. The wealthiest guy on the planet is supremely insecure, and that's driving a lot of this.
And he feeds off the approval of random people on Twitter. I mean, this is a guy who rebuilt Twitter's core architecture to display the number of views a tweet got, just so he could feel better about how often he was being viewed. And now that people are criticizing him in comments, and he's liking tweets that are quite frankly anti-Semitic in many cases, now Twitter's announcing that it's going to enable you to hide your likes. I mean, this is a platform that's increasingly meant to serve one man. So it's no surprise that his audience is fleeing in droves.
So here he is now today. Can he right this ship? Does he want to right the ship? I want to get into, Zuckerberg's threads, the competitive threat that is now. But if you're Elon right now, where's his head at right now, would you guess? Does he want to try to keep this thing going and make it better?
I think this is one of those cases where, for Musk, he's starting to get a little bored. I mean, you see it in what he's tweeting about. Now he's interested. Elon is a guy who's very interested in winning and beating people. It's a very Trump-like thing. He's energized again because of Threads and what Zuckerberg has done. But the last few months have actually shown that he's been very disconnected, that he's not been very accessible as a CEO. He's not been administering the business. And he's largely been leaving it to a skeleton team to keep the site running. Yeah. And even that's not working now. If he's investing heavily in Twitter, he's doing it in a very secret way because not even senior executives are aware of what's being done.
If he had to ultimately just peddle this thing and take a bath and take an absolute loss, that wouldn't impact him financially, correct?
Yeah, not a bit. I mean, people have always been sort of on Twitter death watch. And there's this expectation that one day it'll just blink out and the lights will go out and it'll be done. But the reality is this is the richest guy in the world. He's got the money to run this for a while if he wants to. And it's far more likely that he'll hand it off to some other investor or some conglomerate of investors led by the Saudis like he did with this first round. And what comes will come. But it's clear that right now Twitter has lost its position as sort of the center of internet culture. It's no longer the most relevant place you go for news. It's no longer the sort of central gathering place for breaking politics and media as it was the last few years. And that, even if you can make the company profitable, as Facebook shows, it's almost impossible to get back that cultural connection once you lose it.
And Max, that was Twitter's magic sauce. That was
yeah.
They were the news source. They were the instant breaking news source, the instant breaking political source. And you're saying that they're losing. Are they losing that to some other platform, or is that just out there now with a number of other players?
Well, the nightmare is it's so fragmented. There's Post and Mastodon and Tribal and a dozen others that won't be here in 6 months. And people are sort of hedging their bets and going everywhere. Nowhere is a good replacement because, in honesty, what they're trying to do, these other companies, is mimic a social media model that is no longer recent. It's no longer the dominant model. Twitter worked because it has existed for so long. It had that survivorship bias to it. It had a huge group of people. Building that again is going to be incredibly tough, if it's possible at all. But what's happened is Twitter has lost sort of from the top down. Its most influential users left first. And as they leave, they take all the content they create with them, so Twitter gets more boring. And you just don't have as exciting a group of people to communicate with. And that's what's dragging value down. And Musk has zero plan for how to bring them back.
I'm sure you're right. I think most people, Max, with a large Twitter following like you and I, most of us, I think right now have a foot in each Twitter and Threads. Like I don't want to let go. I want to stay there until the lights go out. I think there are some really high profile people who have left, but I think most are staying on both. But you don't, so you don't see necessarily a replacement. Like it's too early right now for you to say Threads is going to be it, baby.
Yeah, I mean, Threads is certainly one that's launched the cleanest. I mean, Blue Sky, which is Dorsey's competitor, is sort of hindered by his fact that he wants to still keep it very exclusive and private and invite only. But the reality is for a lot of large users, except for the very top and real, media political leaders, someone like me, I'm not going to go through all the work of getting 70,000 followers again on some other platform.
You won't.
I have too much other things to do. And the reality is, until people know that there's going to be a successor, it's a waste of your investment to try and build these out. I mean, the Mastodon boomlet has come and gone, and people there have hundreds of thousands of followers, but nobody's watching. So what is the point?
I'd never thought of that, Max. It's so easy for you and I to get burned out on politics in general. But yeah, the time you need to spend to try to build up a following on another platform, oh my God, I don't want to go through that again.
Yeah, that was bad enough for the first 10 years. I can't imagine 10 more. And the real challenge, though, with the competitors is all the people going over first are the people who want to build big brands. So in many ways, it's a far more hyper-competitive version of what Twitter was. Because at the time we did it, no one realized Twitter could become such a globe-striding, influential piece of political media. But now everyone is kind of aware of it, and they want to be the first ones to hit gold. So as usual, the people making money are the people selling jeans and picks to the gold miners while they're out there toiling to get 5,000 people on post.
I apologize if this doesn't make sense. There needs to be a Twitter, right? Like there needs to be a platform that did what Twitter did. Yes or no?
Yeah, no, I absolutely believe that social media, though it has problems, has never been a reason to give up on it. I mean, we seem to forget that government does have an authority to regulate, and as they did with newspapers and television and radio. And we've, in a way, sort of never bothered to incorporate social media into regulation, the same way we did all the other revolutions in media. So it's become very wild, but it's essential. There is no comparison to the unfiltered, accurate. I mean, the news of Osama bin Laden's assassination and was broadcast first on Twitter. I mean, there's just no comparison for that unfiltered access to news.
Like, Max, there has to be somewhere like that where everybody goes to get breaking news.
Yeah, and that's very true. And at the same time, Facebook and Threads, Meta now, I guess, is verging away from news. I mean, they're ending news in Canada because of lawsuits. And there is just no really reliable single outlet where I can hear directly from newsmakers and journalists and have people announcing news and experts contextualizing it for me right in the same thread. I mean, we will certainly miss it if it goes.
So aren't you, but then doesn't that argue for if Elon Musk sold Twitter to you, Max, tomorrow, that would be great. Well, that's a built-in, but Twitter still has that built-in engine and advantage because this type of a site, it has to be there if somebody were smart and recognized that, Twitter could still be something, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my strategy, if Elon, you're listening, is after all these months of breaking it, just charge everyone $8 a month to go back to how Twitter was under Jack Dorsey, and I guarantee you millions of people will pay for it. Because, well, we complained that it was full of bad memes and that it had free speech challenges. It's nothing compared to the mess that Elon Musk has put forward that's both not good at bridging those free speech challenges and worthless as a media outlet. So it really serves no audience now except for Elon and his friends. But it's not totally broken. You can bring it back. There's just seemingly no interest.
Okay, you can bring it back, and as of now, everybody's gaga over Threads, but I agree with you. I think everybody's over their skis with Threads right now. As of now, there's not a direct placement for Twitter. You don't see it out there.
Yeah, not at all. And right now, there's no likelihood that anyone at Twitter sees what's happening as especially bad. Anyone who criticizes it has long since been fired. So this is going to go towards what I would assume over the next 6 months or a year is sort of a full pay-to-use model, where more and more features are going to become paid only. TweetDeck, which is one of the biggest tools for power users that generate value for Twitter, is now going paid only as of August 1st. And that alone is probably what drives me off of Twitter, because I just cannot manage the content flow I deal with every day without that tool. And I'm not going to pay for it because we've seen it can be provided for free.
So what is, Max, if you had to guess, 18 months, 24, let's go 24 months out, what does Twitter look like 2 years out?
If I had to guess right now, which is incredibly tough because there are so many lawsuits out here that could upend Twitter at any time. I mean, any one of these lawsuits about Musk cheating employees out of severance pay could take tens of billions of dollars off this company's value.
Yeah.
But I would say within 18 months, you're going to see the user base has fallen by about half. And I would argue that the active users will have fallen even sharper. So you'll still have a lot of ghost accounts on there, but the activity you're going to see, you're not going to see as many brands. You're going to see political campaigns even now starting to look for alternatives for direct to audience communication that isn't Twitter. And it's once that sort of lack of momentum sets in, people are going to have less and less reason to check in multiple times a day, and then maybe once a day, and then once every couple days. And that's how the death spiral starts.
And that's interesting. But then there needs to be something else, right? Where are these people going? I keep coming back to that, Max. Then there needs to be somewhere else where these people are going, where somebody like you would go and check in a few times every day.
Yeah, I mean, it almost feels in a way like how the cable media industry worked 10 years ago, where consolidation happened and so many anti-consumer choices were made, and then streaming pops up and everyone fragmented to 15 different platforms, and now they're sort of realizing that that's both expensive and inefficient, and reconsolidating into what are essentially streaming cable packages.
Yeah.
We may see the same thing. My guess is if Facebook is anything like what it has been in the past, Mark Zuckerberg is a very acquisitive CEO. If he sees something like Post or Mastodon that's starting to pick up, he'll acquire it and could do so easily. They have plenty of money for it, and just add their features into Threads, which, if I could advise Zuck for a second, is exactly what he should do, is see what's working out there with these other platforms and just buy those chunks off them. I mean, it's equivalent to pennies for Meta, but it will add so much value to Threads so quickly that Elon Musk and his skeleton crew won't be able to keep up.
Outside of Zuckerberg's just motivation to rule the planet, what's his motivation here with Threads?
Well, this is, I think, Zuck sort of back at his classic 2008 self, where he saw an opportunity, he saw a real weakness in Twitter, and he told his developers to build something as fast as they could, get out a viable product as quickly as possible, no wait lists like Blue Sky, open it to everyone, and then make sure every major newspaper had a story about it. And that has worked. I mean, it's leading the downloads. There's 30 or 40 or now 50 million people who have joined into Threads. It's clearly unnerving Elon Musk, and it's distracting him from the plans he had. Twitter's now shifting their plans. And if I'm Mark Zuckerberg, I see that as the first sign I'm doing something right. If you can make your competitor totally change their 6-month plan, it obviously wasn't a very good plan, and that's a sign that he's going to reinvest in this more heavily.
So what does Threads look like in a year, in 12 months, if it's around?
That's actually a really interesting question. I think one of the areas that a lot of creators want is long-form video.
Yeah.
Especially YouTube creators who have tried to move over to Twitter and other social platforms, is they don't want to have to pay extra to put long videos up. The videos correctly are what create value for the brand.
Yeah.
It's backwards to charge your best users to add value to your brand. And Zuckerberg has been a pioneer in this. I mean, if you remember Facebook before Photos was a huge innovation at the time it happened. And that was something people said was dumb. Now it's one of the only reasons anyone uses Facebook anymore. But I do believe that Meta is a better run company. It's a much more thoughtful company about this than Twitter is. So if they're going to innovate, my guess is they'll fail quickly and they'll learn their lessons and then bring out things that people really want.
Last question on this, Max. No matter what happens, does Elon care about any of this? Like, however this plays out, do you think he cares?
I think on a personal level, it does. You can kind of tell that the criticism grates on him. Like he wants to get in a fist fight with Mark Zuckerberg, for God's sake. He really takes personally more so the criticism that he doesn't know how to manage this company. And that's caused him to make a lot of really reactionary, media alienating statements. But I think he has written off companies as failures before, but none that he's been so personally identified with. He is inseparable from Twitter. So that's a failure personally for him as well. So I think he cares maybe too much. His inability to distance himself has really driven away top talent.
So then does that mean then he, because this is such a unique relationship, him and Twitter, that he cares enough to really say, fuck it now. Okay, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to get this shit together. We're going to, all right, Zuck, bring it on. Does he care like that?
Yeah, the challenge is I think there's just a bunch of bad ideas floating around. Like monetizing it is a terrible idea. Mark Zuckerberg, when he founded Facebook, said one of the core principles is Facebook will always be free. Because once you start monetizing a social platform, people leave. It's a very well-established flow. Elon Musk, for whatever reason, thought that his platform would be different, that people would value it enough to pay to stay. And unsurprisingly, they're not.
Let's shift my Democratic friend to the Democratic Party. And there's no easy way to transition.
Speaking of dysfunction.
Well, and again, for everybody listening to us, I still call myself a proud Tea Party libertarian. I'm a former Republican. Max is a Democrat. Let's start our discussion like this. I want you to react to a thesis of mine. My former political party is just batshit crazy. They're anti-democracy. They're anti-truth. They're pro-authoritarian. They want to destroy their political enemies. They're completely radicalized. Marjorie Taylor Greene isn't fringe GOP. She's closer to mainstream GOP. My former party is fucking nuts and bad and dangerous and anti-democracy. Max, if my former party wasn't all of that, if they were kind of normal Republican-ish, I think the Democrats would be in a lot of trouble. I think the Republicans would still be in the White House. I think they'd control the House and the Senate because I think the Democrats have a lot of problems that have been massively overlooked because my former party is just so fucking off the ranch. Respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, if the Republican Party was still functional, I mean, Democrats would be in real trouble. They were almost in real trouble in 2020. We forget that Joe Biden barely squeaked that out against a Republican Party that was effectively at war with itself at the time. So against a healthy, more centrist party that's actually proposing policies that at least faint toward the mainstream, yeah, I mean, Democrats, in a sense, have gotten very comfortable not having to have serious policy
Great
conversations
point.
with Republicans because they're clowns. You know, they're talking about Hunter Biden and QAnon conspiracies. But then when you get candidates out into competitive races in swing states, in purple states, and they're talking about selling healthcare policy, selling immigration, you notice it's awfully rough around the edges. They are not people who've spoken a lot about this recently
Yeah.
to audiences.
Yeah.
They've been doing so much media that's anti-Republican,
Oh,
anti-Trump
God, yeah.
that they can't nail that policy debate like they used to. And Joe Biden, a guy who's pretty good at it, for many reasons, his team is keeping him off of the trail in that sense. And that to me is one of the stranger choices we
Hey,
made.
Max, that's such a smart point, and I want everybody to hear that, and every Democrat listening to hear that, because I'm that way. We're all that way. When I go on TV every week, I'm talking about Trump and how fucked up the party is, and we all got to defend democracy. I'm not talking issues. You're right. That's such a smart point. Democratic candidates out there are not out there speaking about issues because they don't have to.
Yeah. And I say that as someone who's worked for many Democratic candidates. I've seen over the last decade, over the last 12 years or so, the fluency in conversation has become so much rougher. And it is essentially Democrats taking the bait from the GOP to walk into this circus and debate them on issues that do not matter for people. And at the end of the day, we wonder why Joe Biden's popularity is sagging. It's because if you look in the crosstabs of those polls, Americans do not feel like either party is speaking to the policies they care about. They're fighting each other, and they're fighting on Fox and MSNBC, but no one is talking about the roads and bridges. And that's just because there's a lack of comfort. And ironically, the people touting that infrastructure stuff the most are the Republicans who voted against it.
Well, wait, then Max, what do you tell a Democratic candidate who is running against these batshit crazy Republicans who are a threat to our democracy? Isn't the tendency to be, man, you gotta talk that. You gotta defend democracy. That's going to be what I go after every day.
Yeah, the junk food, as I call it, sort of the junk food comms is really seductive. But the first thing I remind candidates of is that your campaign is not MSNBC.
Yeah.
You're going to go on MSNBC if we're lucky, and we can do that there. But you're talking to real people. A lot of these people do not sit on Twitter all day. They do not get MSNBC daily. They have very grounded concerns about inflation, about their jobs, about their health care. And when we go out and spend the entire time talking about Donald Trump and his felony charges, which I agree are important conversations in context, we're letting that blot out the actual conversations that affect people's lives.
What's your biggest criticism? Forget about the Republicans for a second. What's your biggest criticism of the Democratic Party right now?
Right now, I think the Democratic Party is in a real challenging position figuring out how it talks about social issues.
Yeah.
I think Joe Biden, to a lot of people's surprise, many expected him to avoid those on the 24 campaign, now is very clear he wants to lead with issues like abortion. And I personally find that to be a very strong issue to lead with. Supermajorities of Americans support abortion being free and legal. And the challenge is within the party, especially among strategists and media consultants, there's still this sort of mid-90s fear that talking about abortion is political suicide, that, like Republicans, coaxed Democrats into silence for years on this, much to their benefit. And now you've got very old-hand strategists urging candidates to avoid winning issues. And that, if we get stuck in that consultant sphere again, we're going to see the same kind of disappointments we did with the House in 22.
No, that's Max. You're right. That's completely changed, and I come at it from someone who's on the other side on abortion and guns than you are. But you're right. The abortion thing, that issue has changed. It's since Dobbs. It's advantaged Democrats. I don't think the gun issue is there yet. But you're right on abortion. It's almost like Republicans are the ones who don't want to talk about that issue.
Oh, you can't drag them. If you remember, in the weeks after the Dobbs decision, you couldn't get a response. And that's because, I mean, you look at Pew polling, and 70% of America supports legal abortion, including a third of self-identified Republicans.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to talk about it to my voters either if I'm on the losing side of that issue. But the fact remains, there's been a slowness in Washington Democratic circles to acknowledge just how much the landscape has changed nationwide on issues like that. And as you mentioned, guns is a tougher issue. But I remember after Sandy Hook and after Virginia Tech, Democrats lined up the day after to pledge not to pursue any gun legislation because they didn't want to scare voters. Now Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan is passing huge gun reforms and is being talked about as a candidate for president. So while it may not be a national consensus yet, Democrats certainly seem to now view this as something they want to talk about instead of run away from. And yet we haven't heard a real conversation about that in months.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's going to be a more difficult issue for the Dems, but I agree. They're even stepping out more on that issue. And I also think, Max, like I come from the right-wing media world where they love to play the culture war issues of gender and race. And I'm always on Democrats because Democrats seem to be afraid to engage in these issues and cede that turf to Republicans, where I think most Americans, when it comes to race and gender, are more aligned with where Democrats would be than Republicans.
Yeah, and there is that sort of inherent fear about it. And there's this sense, and I know it because it was the way I was taught when I was a young comms guy, is that there is a hesitancy to, quote, legitimize the conversation that Republicans are having. That if you debate it, then it makes it seem real. And I've got news for Democrats. Republicans have massive right-wing media networks legitimizing it whether you debate or not. So when people say Democrats shouldn't go on Fox News, I couldn't disagree more. I mean, there is a necessity to push back on these issues, and Democrats have got to find their voice. I mean, if 2022 doesn't prove that finding their voice on abortion helped, I don't know how you teach Democrats that lesson.
Did they find their voice, Max, or was it the Supreme Court ruling, or a combination thereof?
That's why.
Yeah.
I mean, that sort of prompted them. And again, it sort of caught off guard. Even though we knew in advance that decision was coming because of the leaks, there was still no real White House plan on abortion for weeks and months afterwards. Now it's been built out into something that's very substantive and I think very good. But it does give the impression that even when we know the punches are coming, we're not setting up for them in advance. And that just gives Republicans free room to flood the zone with misinformation.
Yeah. I hear so much I engage a lot with lower information voters who really don't like either party. That was a big part of my support the last prior to my turning on Trump. And I still engage with these folks, and they don't like either party. And they generally, Max, all tell me kind of the same thing. They tell me Republicans are assholes, they're jerks, but Democrats are like elites and they look down on me and don't understand me. And a lot of these people will tend to vote for the asshole over the person who looks down on them. But I hear a lot of that from lower information voters who don't like either party. Is there any... Does that make sense to you? Does that resonate?
Yeah, and a lot of the reason is people hear from Democrats less than they hear from Republicans. The reality that Democrats don't want to talk about as a party is that since Barack Obama's second term, we've really disinvested in state parties.
Yeah.
All the money in the Democratic Party has moved up to the DNC. We prioritized winning the White House solely. And if we have time and money, the House and the Senate. But governorships, state legislatures, Republicans control those hands down. And so we have A, no bench to build from, and B, there are very few in some red states, almost no local Democrats actually talking about issues with people. So all they get is the caricature from Fox News of wokeness and social issues, and they're really not hearing anything pushing back against that because Democrats don't want to legitimize it.
Oh, yeah, Max, that's so true.
Defined by that.
Yeah, and my former party has been working at the state level forever.
Yeah, for decades. It was a very purposeful strategy that has yielded huge results. I think, what is it, almost 60% of state legislatures are Republican, and some of them are just supermajority in both parties. They don't even need Democrats to show up to work to pass abortion bans. And voters are wondering how that happened.
Yes.
And it's because Democrats didn't invest in candidates. In some swing states, half of races have no Democratic opponent. It's shocking.
Do Democrats get it now? Do they get that now?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not seeing it in the spending. State parties are still strapped for cash. I mean, you look at Wisconsin, which is really standout. What they've been able to do without really any support from the national party is incredible. They've raised tons of money. They have a fantastic chair, Ben Wickler, who works tirelessly to build that party up at the local level. And they're talking about local issues. And surprise, they're doing really well. But I don't blame state parties for not doing that. It takes money and resources. And unless the DNC is going to give them some, we can't expect them to build castles out of nothing. Everybody again needs to understand, without all of that,
then what happens is a Democrat or people on the left will say Latin X to describe Hispanics and Latinos, and everybody in the right-wing media will say that the entire Democratic Party stands for that, and they'll do the same thing with the litany of cultural issues. Defund the police. You know, one person on the left or one member of Congress will say we ought to defund the police, and the entire Democratic Party gets tagged at it. I used to do that, and the right does that. And you're right, Max, there aren't voices to push back against that.
Yeah, and it is sort of a challenge because the Democratic Party's at a decision point, sort of generationally, in deciding what it wants to be for the next generation. We have young leaders coming in like AOC, like Maxwell Frost in Florida, Hakeem Jeffries, and they have views that are much more in line with the majority of Americans. But the party leadership is still, in some cases, from the 80s and 90s, and they have very set opinions on what voters will accept. And that discourse is causing the friction. When people say AOC's fighting Democrats, that's what they're talking about, is this disconnect between where voters are now and where our leaders are. And the fact is, when you're out of step like that, people like Republicans will swoop in and find a way to exploit that gap.
Am I wrong in thinking that, okay, then hit me over the head if you think I'm wrong. Am I wrong in thinking that my former party, I believe, is shrinking as a national political party? And I think like there's an opportunity for a political realignment. The Democratic Party can take advantage of the shrinking Republican Party and expand their tent. And if the Democratic Party became more of a centrist, center left, center right, but centrist, they could realign politics in America. And so don't run too far left, Democrats. Take advantage of this moment. React to that.
So I agree with you on the core of that there is an opportunity here, unlike any we've seen in a generation, to build a new coalition. There are so many issues in flux on abortion, on immigration, on infrastructure and economy, on green energy. And we see that those don't break cleanly on partisan lines. More Republicans than we thought support abortion. More Democrats than we thought support trade protections. So there is a chance to build something new. But I disagree that the answer is not to go left. I think the answer is acknowledging that the center is shifted, that the center today is much to the left of where it was 10 years ago, that the average person's view on gay marriage, on trans people, on abortion is much more progressive and permissive now than it was.
Can I add a nuance? Can I add one nuance to what you said?
Sure.
I agree.
We don't allow nuance in politics anymore, Joe.
Max, okay, I buy that. I think on these social, cultural issues, I do believe the center has shifted to the left. I don't think it has on some of the economic issues. React to that.
I think that may largely be true. I think inflation has really spooked a lot of people. We see that people who even identify as Democrat and traditionally progressive are ranking economic issues higher. And it's hurt in part by the fact that Democrats still don't have a really coherent message about this. Biden has rolled out Bidenomics, which in my mind is a phrase ripe for satire from Republicans.
God.
Easily exploited
Yeah.
for if anything goes wrong in the markets. But I do think that the priority and why I stand with AOC and the left on this is that this progressive caucus and this progressive movement in America socially is such a big unpicked apple. And if we don't do it, those voters will not just vote for Democrats because they're progressive. They expect Democrats to actually address the problems they say they care about. So if we keep ignoring those voters, they're either going to check out or they're going to punish Democrats, and neither one of those we can afford.
So do you risk, though, Max, if you do that, if the Democrats do that and put AOC and others like her out there, guarantee you will energize younger voters and you'll energize voters of color and all the rest. And by the way, that could be what ultimately props up the Democratic Party for a long time. Do you risk continuing to lose working class voters?
Well, I think working class voters are very happy so far in what they've seen from the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bills. Joe Biden has that part very well in hand if he can actually get out there and talk about it. I don't think anybody communicates those kitchen table labor issues as well as he does. But you can't just have this one direction campaign. Democrats have to be able to balance those two issues. It's something someone like Lyndon Johnson did extraordinarily well, is making the point that you don't have to choose between social issues and economic issues. These are intertwined together in ways that affect you every single day. That it's, as Joe Biden has said, you care about universal health care, even if you're a fairly conservative Democrat, because if your wife gets sick and can't go to work for a month, you don't have that income.
Why?
So that matters to working class families.
And hit me, Max, if you think my numbers are off, and I don't have specific numbers, but everything I've seen and read has shown me that the shift in the two parties has been a lot of non-college educated white voters, high school educated white voters, and even we're seeing increases in brown and black high school educated voters gravitating toward Republicans, and college educated white suburbanites gravitating more toward the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is actually becoming the party of wealthier white college grads, whereas the Republican Party is becoming more the party of high school grads, working class high school grad people.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, we see now that the gap is at a record of the more education you have, the more likely you are to identify.
Why is that? Why is that shift happening? Why has that been happening?
Well, I think Democrats are chasing after different groups than they were. I mean, labor is not where it was 20 or even 10 years ago. Labor is still dealing with a lot of decline and a lot of struggle. And Democrats have deprioritized that in a sense. We saw that with Hillary Clinton in the Rust Belt. And they've gone after these deep-pocketed tech executives, Democrats in Silicon Valley, very well represented among the donor class. And they've taken on these sort of urban center people who have transformed into tech hubs and high-skilled labor hubs. And there is, I think, to some extent, a personality and identity component to it, that educated people don't necessarily like the anti-intellectualism, the bigotry, the open-air authoritarianism of Republicans. And even if they may agree on some issues, they just can't bring themselves to support all that comes with it. But you're right. I mean, the focus has changed completely. And labor has let Democrats know that they would like a little more love. It's why you're seeing Democrats lean so heavily on this UPS strike, on the UAW strikes that are negotiations that are happening. But it's in some ways a very late shift.
And I think you're right that that's always been Biden's MO, working class Joe, and he could appeal to these people. But my God, I think he's too old to effectively communicate. And even Max, look, I disagree with plenty of what he's done, but he's been an incredibly successful president domestically. But he's been unable to communicate that. Just 20 years ago, he could have communicated that. Max, I think a lot of this is identity, and I think a lot of it is personality. And I think, Biden, Trump, and again, 24, whatever, Biden wins, then I really hope there are Democrats. Who would be your, I think there's going to be then a food fight for kind of the soul of the Democratic Party once Biden is done. I wish that the Democrats would put up there more like blue collar, roll up your sleeve kind of men and women who can sit at the bar in Peoria, Illinois, or I'd love to see those kinds of Democrats.
Yeah, I think what you're going to see after this election is the generational fight really heat
Ah,
up, because this was AOC made a very public statement of support in endorsing Joe Biden, making clear that we are unified in moving
yeah.
forward. But that only extends to the day after Election Day 2024, because then you're going to have Gavin Newsom, Pete Buttigieg, Gretchen Whitmer, a whole lot of people from the Midwest. Maybe Evan Bile dust his slacks off and get back in it and fight for that moderate voice. But you're going to have a lot of progressives too. And they're going to be very actively campaigning for leadership positions ahead of 2028. The one person it's sort of shocking to hear nobody talking about is Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
She's disappeared from the conversation, isn't polling well internally within the party. And even among progressives who want and believe it's finally time to really push a woman of color, not a lot of them are naming Kamala Harris as their first choice.
Is there room in the Democratic Party for pro-life, pro-gun candidates?
I think that's tough. There's only, I think, one left in the House, Henry Cuellar in Texas, who's pro-life. That's become a really untenable position. I think the Supreme Court's decision accelerated sort of the transition there in the party. Like, I know that I can't imagine the DNC openly supporting in 2024 another pro-life Democrat as publicly as Nancy Pelosi did Cuellar. And that was a lot due to their personal friendship. The party did not really like that very much. For guns, it's different. I mean, that's a very regional issue.
Yeah.
I think the party recognizes that more. And it's not going to step on some winnable races just because someone owns a Smith & Wesson, you know?
Hey, last question on this, Max. Again, I believe my former party is shrinking. I think it will become like a rural regional party. I think people like me, conservatives who aren't at home in that party, I think eventually we have to have a home somewhere. But I do think the Republican Party is going to continue to shrink. My worry, Max, is, and I'll let you respond to this to close, my worry is the Democrats are going to fuck this up and they're not going to appeal to working class Americans, and working class Americans may prop up the Republican Party for a while, and that would bother me.
Yeah, I mean, I worry about that every day. Democrats have a special knack. As a Chicago Cubs fan, I'm used to this, but they have a great knack
We're both there. Yeah.
snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. And they do that by getting in their own heads too much, listening too much to Beltway polling, and not talking about the issues that people care about. And what Joe Biden's doing, I think that I'm inspired by, is pointing out that, hey, working class families have daughters who may need abortions too. And these are all interconnected issues. He's coming late to the intersectional conversation, but he's doing it in his Biden way that sounds very good. The challenge is, how do you sell that? And right now, I'm just not seeing the coherent messaging coming down from the DNC. If it is, the candidates I'm working with are not seeing it. And so they're really being left to find their own messages. And the Republican Party, for their faults, has a very tight messaging machine. You get your points every day and you know where the party stands. But with Democrats, it is very choose your own adventure. And it's why our election results are so scattershot.
Yeah, and I think last point, I think what's interesting about this is historically, Democrats have always done better with younger people. As younger people age and buy homes and have babies and pay taxes, there's more of a gravitational pull toward the Republican Party. But I don't think we're going to see that gravitational pull this time as people get older, because the Republican Party, I think, is so fucked up. So I think that's like a real built-in advantage for Democrats. A lot of these young voters, as they get older, may stay Democratic voters.
Yeah. I mean, the Republican Party has moved vastly far right, vastly faster than society is willing to accept. I mean, the strategy Republicans used for decades successfully was to move that Overton window bit by bit. Now they're just running ahead because it's what Donald Trump wants to do. And that's a gift to Democrats because the issues they're standing on are wildly unpopular. But there's going to come a time when that's not the case. And Democrats, if they want to sustain this and protect democracy, can't just be expecting Republicans to make errors.
Yeah.
They need to build this machine up. And like I said, and like you've pointed out, they've gotten so used to the sort of easier terrain here that the infrastructure's gotten a little bit dusty. And that needs to be beefed up and funded, and people need to be practiced in it, because we will not get a whole lot of extra shots at this once Republicans figure out the game.
Very well said. And also very well said in how fast, how quickly and dangerously the Republican Party has moved. 10 years ago, Max, I was the crazy Tea Party asshole. Now I'm like a moderate rhino Republican, former Republican. His name is Max Burns. Follow him on Twitter as long as he's on Twitter, @TheMaxBurns. Most importantly, read his stuff. Go to his Substack, maxburns.substack.com. You can also see stuff he writes for MSNBC and CNN. He's got a radio show on Sirius XM as well. Check it out. Max, thank you. This was fascinating. Thanks, my friend.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow White Flag with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been White Flag with Joe Walsh.